Ever since I was a little kid, I've had a fascination with the divine. I remember being about 4 to 6 years old. I was at the gym with my mom at the pool, and I lost my mom. I couldn't find my mom. And so I started freaking out because I was a little kid. And I found this lady, and I didn't want to approach her. And this is probably more nurture than it was nature, because when I approached her, I tapped her and I said, "Hey, lady, are you Christian?" As in, is that her faith? And she kind of looks at me confused and she's like, "No, who's that? I don't know who that is." I said, "No, no, I'm asking you, are you Christian?" She's like, "No, I don't know who that is." And I'm getting frustrated because I'm trying to ask her what her faith is. Because as a kid, I didn't want to trust anyone who wasn't Christian as a 4, 5, 6 year old. Fast forward a little bit, by the time I get to junior high, I'm sitting in junior high. And, junior high, people are going through puberty. And in physical education in gym class, what starts happening also around junior high is that the girls started wearing these really short shorts. And me, I was shook by this. I was shook by this. And so I remember in junior high, what I would do is anytime it was PE before the teacher took attendance, I would go into the corner of the gymnasium and I would face the wall. I'd face the corner and I'd do my prayers to kind of help quell those feelings that I had with my raging hormones at that time. And so this was all fine until by the time I got to around age 15, 16, I took a class in high school called AP Psychology. And the thing about AP Psych is the sort of paradigm and worldview that AP Psych puts you in is rather materialistic and atheistic. A lot of the theories in secular psychology kind of do not assume a God and oftentimes even subtly presuppose no God. And so because that was the case, that's when I started having doubts for the first time. And I entered my full-blown depression, this existential depression, by age 15 or 16. And from there, that's when the wild goose chase began. I started learning about Zen and different spiritual practices. And I started learning about Buddhism. I started learning about New Age spirituality and New Age philosophies. And this created this instability because with every single one of these new systems is a different ultimate belief. And what do you believe about reality fundamentally will always dictate the way you think about every single other thing. And the way you think in general dictates the way you behave. And when you're constantly changing your ultimate idea about reality, about God and who God is, it's like having an iPhone or an Android, and every day you wake up and it's wiped fresh. And every day you have to reinstall your apps, and you have to update your messages or try to recover your pictures every single day. That's what happens when you are constantly changing what you believe about ultimate reality. And it's kind of nice for a moment to have a fresh phone. It's fast, it's crisp, it doesn't have any leftover garbage on it because everything is wiped clean, but it gets old and it gets really inconvenient and becomes such a waste of time to constantly be setting it up every day. That's what happens when you're constantly changing what you believe on a fundamental level. And I eventually realized that without a foundation, there's this endless resetting and you won't be able to take any actions whatsoever. Think of it this way. When you walk and you take steps on the ground, for you to take a step, you have to presume that you won't fall through the ground and end up in the ether. You have to assume that. And so for you to have the determination to even take that step, you have to believe that it's reasonable and safe and productive and useful and whatever else to take that step. But if you're constantly questioning, okay, but if I take this step, will I die? Will I fall through the floor? Will I end up in the 17th dimension? Then you can't take the step. You're stuck thinking about the step. You could never take the step. Determination comes from conviction. To be determined even to take a step requires conviction that the ground won't fall out from underneath you. And that ultimately comes from faith. Conviction is from faith, and determination is from conviction. And when you're stuck doubting everything, you're perpetually spinning your wheels. One of the most formative books for me growing up as a teenager and as a young adult was Chesterton's Orthodoxy. Now, it's not about Oriental Orthodoxy. It's not about Eastern Orthodoxy. It's called Orthodoxy to refer to Christian tradition in general. And it's a book written by G.K. Chesterton in the 19th century, if I recall correctly. And Chesterton speaks about this in his book Orthodoxy. He says that what happens with a lot of people who don't have orthodoxy, the traditional Christian faith, in his time, and our time is not that different than his time, is they're constantly ideology hopping, especially young people. One day they're a communist, the next day they're a capitalist, then they're a socialist, then they're left wing, then they're right wing. And without faith, your ideologies really just become fads. You're kind of just caught up in the ideology of the time. You're not rooted in anything timeless. And you're in this endless rebooting system instead of really building anything. And this isn't really just a personal problem. This is something that we're trained to do. This is how we're trained to think here in the West. School teaches us to act this way and think this way because school does glorify this endless questioning. If you go and you look at philosophy programs in public schools across the country and in public universities, what's foundational to philosophy as it is taught nowadays in these universities is skepticism. There's a glorification of the Enlightenment. There's a glorification of even Socrates. And Socrates was the original skeptic. But even Socrates believed in God. Socrates had more of a foundation. But because we see things in general in academia, in Western academia, through this materialistic and this naive empirical worldview, meaning we don't believe anything's real except what can be observed through the five senses, sight, touch, sound, whatever else. Because we believe that in school, and that's kind of the worldview that we inherit in the modern education system, even Socratic skepticism becomes cynicism. Something else that really emphasizes this is science and the scientific method. The scientific method is always about question your assumptions, question your assumptions, question your assumptions, have a hypothesis, question your assumptions, reiterate, never take a conclusion as final. And science is great. And science and that sort of scientific method and perspective is good as a tool. But when you apply that sort of paradigm to your ultimate way of thinking, that's when you end up in this perpetual cynicism and this perpetual spinning of your wheels. And so it's not enough to just believe in anything or just have faith, because the wrong faith will have you build the wrong life. It'll have you have the conviction required to take gregarious action. You'll have it. But if you have it in the wrong thing, then you're going in the opposite direction. You will have confidence in the wrong thing. An obvious example of this, I don't know if I could say his name on YouTube without getting flagged or shadow banned. Teeny Mustache Man, you know who I'm talking about. The little guy, right? And he had strong faith, but he had the wrong foundation. And because he had a strong conviction in what he believed, he was able to go out there and have his will to power. But since it was on the wrong foundation, he made a huge mess. And conviction without truth, it just destroys everything. It's potent still. Faith inherently by itself is potent. But if you have faith, and because it's so potent, so powerful, if you apply it wrongly, it creates wrong outcomes powerfully. And the scariest thing about our convictions, about our ultimate commitments, is that we don't even realize. Many people don't really realize what they even are. Most people are blind to what their ultimate commitments are because they don't have enough self-reflection. They don't have enough self-awareness. Many people, for example, might profess Christianity. They'll say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian for sure. But underneath, they have idols that they worship more. Common ones are status, money, women, whatever else. And their actions are aligned with their true convictions and not what they profess out of their mouths. And that individual might not even be aware that they're doing this. That's why we have things like quarter life crisis or midlife crises, because it's these people who think that they think one thing, but they really believe something else deep down inside. And so this cognitive dissonance eventually catches up to them and they have this crisis. That's how that happens. And so that doesn't mean that there isn't a phase of searching or seeking or changing your worldviews. In some ways, this can be healthy because it means you're humble enough to know that you might not know everything and that you need to learn more. And it also shows a hunger for truth. Let me get the sip of water. And so it's fine for a season. It's fine when you're really seeking. But what can end up happening is you can end up in a situation where you found it and you know deep down in your heart what it is. But because it's uncomfortable, you stay in this limbo, or you stay in this loop, and you avoid going to the truth. This happens all the time. An obvious example is people who really want to become Christians deep down, but some sin is holding them back, or they want to be devout, but some sin's holding them back because they can't let go of the sin. It's like if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, it's like the ring itself. Once it's in the possession of someone, they struggle to let go of it. They can't let go of the sin. And so they keep them. The consequence of this is they throw mud in their eyes. They insist on the blinders. They know deep down what the truth is. They've come to it, but they don't want to accept it because of sin. But sooner or later, right, deep roots are important because the deeper the root, the taller the tree. That's the way it works. And furthermore, reason, right, reasoning using your logic, it can't replace faith, but it is a useful steward of faith. I talked about this a little bit in my last video. Math, for example, we have something like Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It shows that there's a level we can kind of dig and get more and more fundamental in mathematical theorems and theories. But what ends up happening in mathematics, in theoretical mathematics, is we hit this threshold, this point, where there's no more that can be said. There's no more, like, any further than this goes beyond the reason. It's a real thing in math. It's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And the same is true in philosophy. Philosophy, reason, it can only abstract so far. But then you get to a point where you have to take that leap. Otherwise, you can't come to a conclusion. That's why philosophers, till this day, for thousands of years, have been in endless debates, back and forth. Even the two main pillars of Western philosophy, the classical Greeks, Aristotle on one end and Plato on the other. There's this perpetual dialectic between the two all of the time. And it shows up even today still, and throughout all of Western history. Oh, this guy was right. No, this guy was right. No, this guy was right. No, this guy was right. Back and forth. And even in theology, we know the limits of reason. That's why we have something called apathetic theology, which means that we learn about God by thinking about what God is not. Because we cannot grasp what he is with the intellect. It embraces mystery. Theology embraces mystery beyond reason. And reason can lead us to the edge. It can help you get to the edge. But then faith carries you where reason ends. And history shows what happens when you have faith and your life is anchored in faith, and when it isn't. An example I love to think about all the time is the example of two Roman emperors. On one end, you have Marcus Aurelius in the 1st century or 2nd century. And Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic emperor. He's considered one of the 3 big Stoic philosophers. And Stoicism is about doing your duty, living your purpose without complaining too much. Don't whine too much. Do whatever your job is and do it with dignity, and don't complain, and just go through it. This is kind of the spirit of Stoicism. It's about being noble, but it's very defensive. And that's why during Marcus Aurelius' time, because he wasn't really rooted in a deep faith, he was a defensive emperor. He didn't really expand the empire. He kind of held the line at best, and he didn't really set up the empire for a good successor, because who came after his son after him was horrible. And it's not expansive. It's not gregarious. It's not bold. It's holding the line. It's playing defense. And if you contrast that to someone like Constantine, the emperor that legalized Christianity throughout the empire and helped in its spread, he was really faith-driven, and he had zeal, and he was expansive, and there was soul and a fire in him, and he went out and he did it. That's what happens when you have a deep conviction that leads to a deep determination that stems only from a deep faith. And with faith, we reshape civilizations for better or worse. I talked about the guy with the little mustache. There's Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great. All of them had faith, whether in the right thing or the wrong thing. But they all had a deep-rooted faith. They wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. Let me end off by talking about Solomon. Solomon from the Bible, the wisest man to have lived. He says, vanity is vanities, all is vanity in the Bible. And without faith, everything becomes hollow. Career, what's the meaning? What's the purpose? Relationships, fame, wealth, what's the meaning of it all? If you build them on sand, and that's what happens when you don't have a strong faith and strong conviction. Not only could you build the wrong things, but the things you build don't have a solid foundation. You can't answer the question of why. And if you follow that trail of whys, you know, when a little kid is going up to their parent and they're like, "Why, daddy?" And then the dad responds, and then the kid says, "Why, daddy?" And this repeats over and over again until dad gets frustrated. He's like, "I don't know why. Stop bothering me. Go away." And if you don't follow, but it's important to follow that trail of whys. And if you don't follow that trail of whys all the way back to the bottom, then you're building on sand. And I will end this video by talking about the story of Sisyphus. He's from Greek mythology. You might have seen pictures of him. You know, that guy who's like pushing this big boulder up the hill. It's some Greek myth. And the moral of the story is that Sisyphus, the guy pushing the boulder, he was destined to push this boulder forever, and his labor is in vain. And unless we have the right faith, a strong faith, a faith so stable that we can create conviction over it, and we can create determination over that conviction, then everything you build in the long run will collapse. But with the correct faith, we participate in victory eternal.